In our productivity-oriented culture, we can sometimes overlook the importance of artistic pursuits as a cornerstone in our children's education. But today's guest, veteran homeschooling mom Tami Kiser, is here to help us with some powerful insights into helping our kids develop a love for the arts.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa Mladinich, your host, and I'm so happy to have an old friend back on the show. We're talking with Tami Kiser today about helping our kids develop a love for the arts. Tami Kiser lives in the mountains in Sunset, South Carolina at Heart Ridge Retreat and Cultural Center. She's a mom of 10 with 2 children still at home and a grandmother to 10. She's an author of 2 books published by our Sunday Visitor. One is Smart Martha's Catholic Guide for Busy Moms. Check out her Smart Martha podcast, and that will all be in the show notes. She has produced numerous video programs for parents and women, which can be found on Formed, a Catholic video platform. She currently holds a part-time teaching job with a long commute at St. Joseph's Catholic School in Greenville, South Carolina. The rest of her time and energy is spent on retreat center operations with her husband, Keith. This involves scheduling and hosting other groups and individuals, as well as planning their own in-house retreats, camps, and conferences. Currently, she's also the head cook and housekeeper. She has a passion for nature and wildlife and loves all forms of art and music. Her vision for the retreat center is for the people who visit to find beauty there that will draw them closer to God. And you'll find all things Tami and Heart Ridge at heartridgeministries.com, just how it sounds. And again, that's in the show notes. Welcome back, Tami. It's great to see you again.
It's so good to be back too. Yeah, we're recording nice and early in the morning. It's a beautiful morning here at the retreat center, so I'm excited to have this conversation with you. This is something I am very passionate about. So.
Yeah, I know you are, because I know you're a dancer, and I know that you've really been a champion of the arts in lots of different ways, including your videography. I've had the joy of being parts of some of your programs across the years, but you really do bring a passion for that creativity into everything that you do. And so I imagine the retreat center probably bubbles up with your creativity as well.
Oh, yeah, it does. And they just go hand in hand, Lisa. I mean, I think, I've been reflecting a lot about, actually, I've been listening to the Catechism in a year, I'll confess that. And I'm just overwhelmed where it comes up so often. And maybe, like, I forget what they call that effect. Like, if you're listening for something, you find it everywhere kind of thing. So I'm finding it by reading some stuff like that. But it's just really struck me this year how creative our God is. He's just a very creative God. And like you said, I'm in the mountains, I'm in the nature, I'm surrounded by this creativity, just like the simple birds or the bugs. I mean, it's just amazing how creative our God is. I mean, he didn't have to make anything like that, but he's a God of this beauty and creativity. And being in his image, I think it's just so important that we cultivate that in ourselves, even as adults, whether it's just being reflective and, looking at his creativity, or even it's just developing our own creativity. I mean, this can be in just ways that we make cookies with the kids or decorate our room or just things like that. So I'm excited about this topic. And I think as we try to develop the arts in our children, we're like, helping them mirror God. We're created in his image, and this is just a aspect that we really need to bring out in our children and not let it get stifled. And as homeschoolers, we have such great opportunities to do this. In public schools and private schools, they have this agenda. They have to do so much math and reading. And I know as homeschoolers, we don't want to skip on those things either. I'm not, suggesting that. But we tend to have a little more time in our schedule so we can develop these other aspects, which in turn come back and help the mathematician and help, the writers in literature. I know sometimes for college applications, I forget what it was, but like at some college application, they asked questions, and it was some Ivy League, and it wasn't, they didn't really want to see grades because they've seen all these SATs and all these scores, but they wanted to see the kids create something, or, I mean, that was part of the application process. And I think that's interesting too. And I've seen that with the interviews at Apple and places like that, where they want to see creativity, because this is a skill that we need, and one that we can develop and encourage.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that when my daughter, she changed her mind several times about what she was going to do with her life, but at one point was looking at medical schools, and we noticed that the top medical schools were looking for applicants that had some kind of creative thing that they'd gone deep on, whether it was playing an instrument or making art or whatever that might be. And I thought, how wonderful that they're looking for well-rounded individuals, not just science practitioners, but human beings.
Right, because we need that creativity. We're not going to find the next cure for cancer if we can't be creative and think outside the box. We can't. And mathematicians wouldn't be where they are now today if they didn't have that, be able to look at a problem in a different way. And that's just part of our, being, sort of created in God in that way, but then something we just really can develop and help our kids to be free thinkers in that way. It's the idea of a liberal education too. And I'm sure you've had discussions about that kind of thing. The whole idea of a liberal education is really what we need in our kids.
Yeah, and never enough of that conversation, I think. So, Tami, where did it begin for you? What do you remember igniting your passion for creativity and art?
I'm just always, and I kind of wondering if it was my mom. My mom was very creative. My mom was so creative. And so I think I just naturally took it up from her. She was a dance teacher. So I come from that background of dancing. I never wanted to be a dance teacher, Lisa. I just never did. I mean, there's nothing, God bless them, dance teachers, but you all know what a dance teacher is like. Like, we all have this image of what a dance teacher is, and it's, God love them. That's just never what I really wanted. So I never, I went to school for math. I love math. So that people find that very interesting. No, I love math. I excelled at math in school. And I love the creativity with figuring out proofs and going about things in a different way, and logic. I love that. So that my creativity certainly helped in that way, but I ended up studying some dance in college just because it's fun to do. And I had so much experience at it. And sort of roundabout way, I ended up teaching courses at college because I had had so much experience. I kind of grew up in a dance studio. So having that, I was exposed to so many different kinds of music. And I think that's what got my love for music, is just listening to all the different music. And I was in a great dance studio. Like, we did all kinds of different cultures and different kinds of music. Old time things, what was new in culture, but really an appreciation for other kind of cultures and other time eras too, things from the 20s, the jazz, the big band. So I really had a nice exposure to music in that way too, which I think is great because my parents were not college educated. So, I kind of had a disadvantage in that way, but they love music and dance. So I think that's what sort of brought it. But I also was encouraged in being an artist, drawing, visual artist. So my mom always was encouraging me, my mom thought everything I did was just wonderful. So
that's so sweet.
Didn't see that falsely or whatever, but just so much encouraged me, thought I was the greatest artist in the world. And so I loved it too. So that's just sort of my background a little bit. It's not huge, but you don't have to be like an artist yourself even to have a child who can be encouraged in these things. And so that helped me. That gave me this love for art, I guess. And then I went to a liberal arts college, which I think really helped as well. Gave me an appreciation for all genres of literature, history, and how it's all tied together in that basic background. So there's not so much just one particular skill, but
Yeah, so good. And I was thinking as you were talking about being exposed to all these different kinds of music, that in spite of not having a college education, your
Yeah,
parents were stimulating your brain in ways that now scientists tell us through
yeah,
music, through all different kinds of music, are really extremely healthy for the development of our brains and for our intellect even. And so in
yeah.
fact, I've heard correlations between classical music and math ability. Like there are many mathematicians apparently that are really into classical music that
Right.
even may play a classical, instrument, that sort of thing. So it's just so God's designs are endlessly intriguing.
They are. They are. And his pathways are so interesting. And it's beautiful to look back and reflect on that because I've always been kind of I always felt like I was at a disadvantage because like my father didn't even graduate from high school. So we're from the other side of the tracks, that kind of thing. But I had ballet. So yeah, I was listening to
Oh,
classical music, so yeah, it's neat to look back on that. And now classical music's a big important part of our family. I have my son's a classical pianist and plays for a symphony. So I mean, it's been really immersed into passed on to our kids in that way.
that's just beautiful. Oh, you're just warming my heart like crazy. So you've kind of moved a little bit into how it's been helpful to you in your own life, but can you take that out a step further in your vocation, in the way God is leading in your life? Like, how has being steeped in the arts and in creativity been a benefit to you?
To me personally,
Sure, and
uh,
anything else that
to
you
my
want to
kids,
spark
yeah.
on
I
there.
mean, I'm well. It's a stumper, Lisa. You got me. No, I mean, like I said before, I'm like, I, I, I just appreciate the creativity of God for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and this beauty and art opens us up in ways that it's hard for words to describe. And I think that's the point of beauty. And sure, you can find beauty in nature, you can find beauty in your child's face, but beauty also is an art. And you've heard a song that it just moves you. It gives you goosebumps. I mean, it can be even a very Manilow song. I mean, but there's some good classical music too that just like it takes your breath away, and it's that kind of feeling that can open you up to what God is doing in your life and in creation in the world. It gives you an awareness of something bigger than yourself. It makes you
Mm.
know that for me it's like an assurance of, yeah, there's more. I'm more than just like a composition of cells. It's hard. I can't imagine like an atheist like listening to like I'm trying to think of a good piece of classical music, whatever, like a Beethoven piece or something like that, or even like and feeling that, being moved in that way. I've even seen beautiful dances too. I'm a dancer. I don't know if other people feel that way, but I've been moved by people's dancing where it's just you get goosebumps and it's just this. And you know, I mean, how can people like not think that there's more out there and that there's more to us than just this? We're just a bunch of cells and little things going on, and those emotions are just little synapses or so on. So it just
Yeah.
really opens us and gives us with a wonder bug, the same feeling you get when you go out at night, if you can be where there's stars and you look up at the sky and you see stars. And of course
Yeah.
artists try to paint that same sort of impression, and you just see that beauty, and it just gives you that awe and wonder of the world and of your creator.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I teach for Homeschool Connections a class on authentic beauty for young
Oh
girls.
yeah,
And one of the things that I have them read is John Paul's letter to the artists, because there's
yeah,
this sense of making a masterpiece of your own life, but also of the artist in always reaching toward the perfection of
yeah,
what they glimpse within themselves through
right,
the inspiration of God, what they're trying to create through dance or photography or whatever it may be, or composition, that they're reaching into the divine creative power. And so even though it never fulfills what they glimpse within their own souls when they desire to create, it nevertheless breathes God's presence into the world in that creation of
right.
beauty. It's so stunning.
It is, and that's a beautiful letter. Yeah, but it's that search. I mean, good artists like pull that search out in all of us. And if you're doing the artistry too, you're seeking that. You're searching, which is that restless heart idea. We're just searching for God and reaching for Him. Yeah, and that's our
Yeah.
life as a Christian, as becoming saints. Is that ever seeking, ever reaching God.
Where else do we see in the church that touchstone of creativity or beauty? What do you particularly like?
Well, if you go to a good mass, of course, right? It should be that way. And it's funny because, I've gone to I'm living out in the country now, so we have some pretty small country churches, and the singing's like the choir, which is just, plain folk. Like,
Uh-huh.
I'm not a singer. But it is there, but like, you see the beauty in like the music in mass. That can be very moving and reach you on. And of course, you've got so much art as a reflection of stories in the Bible, or just you walk into a cathedral. I mean, that's always the example I think of. I mean, if you walk into some of those cathedrals and you look up at the ceiling and you look in the stained glass windows, and you get why it's worth putting that investment into a church. People are like, you don't want to spend all the money, give the money to the poor. All this time and money spent building that cathedral could be spent doing good, but I know you get it. It's for that worship of God, and that's pulls us up to heaven. You get even how the cathedrals are shaped. So I love to see it in that, and in the music and in church as well, I think.
Yeah, and a story comes to mind, and I really wish I could remember the name of the priest. I listened to him tell a story a friend sent me on YouTube years ago. And he said that he had an atheist friend who was traveling in Spain. And one night he was walking through a Spanish village alone, and he heard the most beautiful sound. I always choke up when I remember this story. And he followed the sound right up the steps of a Catholic church, an old-fashioned stone, little European, beautiful little church. And they were having benediction, and they were chanting, and that was the sound that had drawn his heart. He walked into the church, was dumbfounded, just struck by pure beauty as he entered into the presence of God and fell to his knees and was converted on the spot.
Yeah, wow.
The power of the art, of the music, and of course the presence of God was speaking to him through it all.
Right.
That ability that art becomes a bridge to what is transcendent, opens our hearts and makes us vulnerable to the whispers of God into our souls. I mean, this thing happens with art that is meant to be there by God.
Right. That's right.
So good. So good. So step us into, just some of the ways that we can help our children start to become interested in the arts. And, I feel like our kids at home have the advantage that they're there in the loving embrace of the family, whereas kids in school someone's making fun of what they're making, or, you know what I mean? That sort of thing can happen. Of course, it can happen in the family, very much so.
Oh my, but so, words. I was going to sound early.
And I'm not necessarily advocating for perfectly safe spaces either. But what do we do? How do we start to develop that interest in them?
Well, it is, it's more caught than taught, of course. So, some ideas that come to mind is to, fill your house with beauty, and it's not overdone. My office is really messy right now. Like I have, you put art on the wall. I know it becomes just, they get sort of used to seeing it, but I think it can be very effective just to have just nice art. And it's okay. I'm an advocate of trying to do local artists as well as like the famous paintings. I mean, I think it's good to expose them to the famous art. That's kind of in a way of an educational thing, but it's interesting to have local artists that they can meet or see or know that this is this person in the city here painted this and this is their expression. So that's also encouraging. But also I like having some of the classic pictures up in so they know what is good art. that gives them some criterion for that. And I don't want to talk about what's art and what's not, Lisa. Don't ask me that question, because I know that's a huge debate. And about, because I like some modern art. I really do. I like some of it. And I think, if that's its purpose, and there are some, Christian, Catholic, modern artists. And I think, art that makes you wonder, makes you question sometimes, I think can be effective in that way. Like, what is that artist trying to say? And that's part of his search. So I think you can still learn from that. You don't have to have just all, I love all forms of art. I really do. I love them all. But like Impressionists too. Those aren't like picture perfect clear, but it gives you that impression of the beauty or what that artist is experiencing. I'm thinking mostly visual arts too, because I'm talking about stuff on your wall. And then, music, fill your home with music. I think these are things we all sort of know. And don't, even if you're not comfortable and you don't like classical music, I think maybe you educate yourself a little bit about it and expose your kids to different kinds. And it doesn't always just have to be Beethoven and Bach. It can be some of the other classical music. It can be music from other countries, other cultures. Like if you're studying China, listen to the music that they listen to there. That's beauty that people have created there. I think that's an interesting way to incorporate art into all our subjects. Now I'm going all over the page on suggestions, Lisa. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be specific.
No, it's wonderful. You're giving me so many ideas.
So if you can put it in your home, I think that's good. And that would be music, and that would be art on the wall. That's just some very simple ways that you do anyway. So, be more intentional about that. And I'd be more intentional about your music. I don't think, probably most homeschoolers are really good about maybe just playing classical music, but you can play all genres. I think people err on both sides. Like sometimes they'll just listen to modern pop music, or they'll just listen to classical music. And I think both have something to offer us. So I think there's a nice kind of spectrum. Let's expose our kids to all of it, because there's some good that can be out of both of it. So that's just exposure, but pulling it into their education. Of course, the obvious is what piano lessons, dance lessons, musical instrument lessons, art lessons. Those are some of the obvious things you can do. But then, we were just talking a little bit off camera about how busy we are and how busy that can really make a family if you're running around to all those things. I think discernment about, you don't want to have your family be hectic either. But at the same time, you only have this moment of your kids when they can really learn how to play the piano or learn to play an instrument. So I think that is a big priority. We tend to give soccer, football, or all those other things a priority. And I'm going to say it. It's not going to really benefit your son or daughter too much when they are in their 20s if they can play soccer or football. Things that they're going to be able to learn just by playing catch or kicking the ball outside. I think people should be physically active. I'm not saying anything against that. But they can play sports and do intramurals and gain some of those skills. But to be able to play a piano or an instrument when they're in their 20s is really, really difficult. They're not going to be able to have that time or that learning capacity to pick up an instrument at that point. They could, of course. But I'm just comparing, like I'm thinking of 20-year-olds, like they're not going to play professional soccer. They're just not. Let's just face it. Nobody who's listening to this kid is going to play professional soccer, basketball, football, whatever. But they're going to enjoy being able to play a song on a piano, write a song. And just once they learn how to play an instrument, they appreciate music so much better because they can understand it better. They can hear different parts in it because they've had that experience playing it. So I would put a priority, especially if you're homeschooling, you have that opportunity. And I know it's a financial burden. Like, I know that. Oh my gosh. Like, for the longest time, we could not afford piano lessons for our kids when our kids were, we just could not afford it. So I was looking for all these creative ways and, pray about it. You might find someone down the street and, you could pay someone to come into your home and do all of them. I mean, there are some creative ways around it. Maybe it is the lady in your church who plays piano. She's not per se a piano teacher, but she could get your kids started. And there's online things. Those were never successful for me because, I mean, kids can do it and they can get a good start, but it's hard. I mean, you could do maybe a Zoom piano lessons, and that's a little bit more economical. And it doesn't have to be piano, of course. People are into strings, but seriously, I think giving the kids an instrument is a gift and a look into art and music that you can give them at this stage that they'll always appreciate having as adults. They'll have this love and appreciation for music that they can't get anywhere else. And if you could do ballet, dance. I might know, I'll put this out there too. Some of the dances that people do in those little dance studios with the little girls and the little costumes, I'm like, no, I'm just very uncomfortable.
I'm right with you there.
And it's not that I'm against modern music in any way. I'm not against even hip hop dance. I think that's fun and it can be. But, personally for my daughter, we just stuck with ballet. And then you've got all the things that come with the discipline and again, it's expensive. It just is. It's just one of those sacrifices that we've decided to make as a family so that, we can give this gift to our daughter. So she's got that sort of gift of grace that can come in. And it is a discipline. So it's not even just the beauty of the art. It's also the learning how to practice. And those skills are with the piano too. Like, you practice even when you don't want to. You practice things you don't want to. And what, great skills and fortitude, those virtues, right? Can be had from music lessons, dance lessons, and lessons in the art. And of course, you don't want it to be something they don't, that they hate, because we're like educating them to hate piano because they did it so long. So that is something, parents need to evaluate once in a while, and maybe it's the teacher and so on. But with anything, if you want to be good, it takes hard work. It takes practice. So I think that can be learned too. And I think that's okay. And I mean, and I know, I don't know how much time we're going to have left, Lisa, but I just think with your lessons in general, you can tie in art in practically every subject you teach, like, especially in history. Like, there's art with every historical period. There's the art that the people are doing. And if you really want to understand what those people were going through during that time period, look at the art that they did. The art reflects sort of what was going on in the culture. And don't miss that piece of the puzzle that makes that education of that time period so much more in depth, because you're understanding the people at that time. When I teach dance, we learn the dances that people do from different time periods. And it's so interesting that the dances that they do really reflect what's going on. Like the ballet comes from Louis the Sun King. Okay, think of Louis the 14th. If I said that wrong, I'm sorry. But he's the Sun King. He, in the French courts, this is where ballet started. And you can see the extravagance of and the discipline and all that, and the courts at the time, they're just so extravagant. And here's this king who is the sun god, and that was a ballet role that he did, and he brought ballet to people. So you can sort of imagine this huge pageantry with this real formal ballet going on, and that was how the culture was at this time in the courts, so. So anyway, so tie in art, look for it. And that just really will enrich the education. And of course you can do it in math. I always did art as a separate subject as well, because I wanted my kids to really develop art skills. And the material in homeschool world is just so fantastic. There's books that teach you how to draw. There's books that'll teach you about all the different artists. I mean, there's just so much good stuff out there. Even like the little writing books, the Draw Right Now series, where you learn to write and while drawing a picture with them. Just stuff like that. You can look for how you can incorporate art into all your other subjects too. So it just sort of becomes part of their education, and it makes that education more full, more interesting, more deep.
100% agree. We're going to take a short sponsor break and we'll be right back, everybody, with Tami Kiser talking about developing an appreciation for the arts in our children. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Walter Crawford.
And I'm Maureen Whitman.
We are the co-founders of homeschoolconnections.com and proud sponsors of the Homeschooling Saints podcast,
which is here to help you homeschool more joyfully, more easily, and more effectively.
We want to thank you for listening.
And we invite you to check out our courses at homeschoolconnections.com.
And now, back to our program.
All right, everybody, we are back with Tami Kiser talking about helping our kids develop a love for the arts. And Tami, you've been raising your 10 children and you still have 2 at home. That's got to be a lot of different kinds of personalities and aptitudes. Can you just give us a sense of how steeping them in an appreciation for the arts has shown up or affected different kinds of personalities in kids? I'm kind of curious about that.
Sure, that's a great question because people have, people ask me, are all my kids different? How many different personalities? It's 10 different personalities. And it's just so funny. You raise them all the same way and they're just all so different. So it's been such a joy to see how they've taken this idea of appreciation of the art. And, and of course, my husband's on board with all of this. He's a classical music nut. I'll just put it that way. He's got this huge collection of classical music. So, they get a lot of that from their dad. And then, I love dance, of course, but I also love painting. So I do a lot of visual arts and generally just arts and crafts too. So we're always making something, paper mache or whatever. So that's just kind of always a fun thing that we've always done as a family. And then, I didn't mention this before, and I won't forget what track I'm on, Lisa. So I'll remember that. But
okay.
As far as, we were talking about, and maybe we'll circle back to that too. When we talk maybe more specifics about material, we can close maybe with that. But I talked about putting art in the home, but I went out of my way to take kids to museums, art museums. They offer so many homeschool discounts, homeschool days. We looked for every single kind of discount we could do. Like with a large family, we'd get a family membership to these places and we would really, take advantage of that because we got 10 admissions and it was just, for the whole year. So we would go in and just spend different parts of different galleries. So, don't be afraid to take kids. It's good for them to learn proper behavior too in a museum. Don't be like some of these homeschool families. I know we like to let our kids kind of run wild and, some homeschoolers have that reputation. And I get that, we have a lot of kids need to be free and so on, but there's a place where they need to learn some discipline and to be quiet. And we represent the homeschool community and often we represent our faith. And so we need to be that face of people. So we need to be the respective people when we walk into a museum or so on. You can tell I've had some experience. I've led a co-op too forever. And in our co-op, I always would do the art class. And that's a wonderful place to also get exposure because I know you don't have time at home to get all the plaster Paris or the paper mache stuff out because you just have so much time in your day. You don't want big extra messes. But, putting art in a part of your co-op, if you have that time to do that, is a wonderful experience for the kids to do together. And it's just like a nice little extra. Like when we have co-ops, we always did sort of the extra stuff that you don't have time to do at home. So art in a co-op is wonderful. But back to I've taken co-op groups to museums and stuff like that. So guys, we're being an example for people or whatever. But take kids to museums, take little kids to the museum, expose them to these beautiful, large, they're huge when you go there, and take your time to look at them. Take your kids to plays, to operas. Many times, we would go to see the symphony orchestra because they play out in a park. So we would go to those performances and sit up front. Our symphony does the things in the library. So you can go to little concerts in your library. You just have to be really resourceful because I know you can't buy, $50 tickets to take your kids to the symphony. But if you look, there's so many community outreaches in all of these programs. Even when we lived in Pittsburgh for a little bit, the Pittsburgh Ballet had an outreach program for low income families. And like I said, we were poor, so I don't. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
speaking to many of you, I know, because you're like single income. It's hard. They had an outreach program. I took a lot of my boys to this ballet class with these professional ballet dancers, so they had a little bit of exposure of dance at that point. They didn't really stick with ballet too long, but it's just nice to have a little bit of exposure, seeing what ballet is, and then so be resourceful. There's opportunities out there. There's a lot of grants. People are looking to spread, the arts. They do. They want to get that education out there. So take advantage of all those. Local colleges offer plays and art, even just like local art shows, So look for those. That's a great way of really immersing your kids in that. And I was just talking about how our kids are all different personalities. And I just kind of wanted to speak about how they've responded in different ways. The trouble with giving your kids a love of art, I'm going to warn you now, they may want to be artists, which is a tough life. It's a really tough life. Like my one son, he has a band and he wanted to be a rock star. He wants to tour, but of course, who gets to do that? So he's making his living as a worship leader at a church. So he's the full-time worship leader it's a Methodist church. He is Catholic, but he's at this Methodist church. That's how he pays the bill. And he's got 2 bands going on the side. So, that, he wanted to do the artist thing. And then my daughter, she's an actress. She lived in New York City for about 8 years and of course was a waitress, but also did some shows. Now she's in Chicago, being an actress there. So, that's a tough life, but she's doing it. She's an actress. And then my one son, I mentioned him. I have a son who's a pianist for a symphony. So, he that's a hard job to get. He's not like at a giant symphony somewhere, but it's a city symphony. So he's got that job. And of course he's doing music lessons on the side and he's got a pretty good living doing that. A couple other sons are in the recording field. So they record music for people and they're on the audio side. And so you see a lot of my children have chosen to be actually artists. And that's a tough life, but they love it and they wouldn't change it for the world. Their job is what they love to do. It's not like the grind, this is their life. But I have other sons who are like, I have a son who's an engineer and he was my most artistic son, but he was sort of the architect, like drawing houses and he was just a really good drawing artist. And now as an engineer, he's like in charge of he's in charge of the roads at this one county where he is. So that's his job to oversee how they build the roads and stuff like that. But I see that skill of being able to, I don't know, it's very specific and his unique drawing and drawing things very detailed. That detail orientation has translated for him to be an engineer. And I have another son who so creative with music and a little bit with drawing and putting things together. And he made films in high school. And now that creativity that he has, he creates apps. So, and he thinks outside the box. What are people not doing with their apps? And then, computer programming, it's so creative. Like there's so many ways you can do it. And he's putting it all together and he's thinking and then visually present it so that it looks nice as an app for somebody. So that's how art has affected some of my kids. They've become artists and then some have used their art in their career. So, I just think it's important that, we stick to this. Don't just stick to the subjects where they're going to get a good paycheck someday, but these ideas will spark something in them and they'll do what they've been created to do and use the gifts that God's given them.
Mm-hmm. And now you're talking my language because as a coach, that's what I'm all about is calling out whatever that authentic identity is that God has woven into them. So exciting. And why don't we just segue right into as we're starting to wrap up, Tami, you are living in this beautiful place. You said there's a lake right outside your window, a place where people really can listen to the voice of God and reflect and be in that vulnerable, intuitive, creative space with the Lord. Just tell us a little bit about Heart Ridge Ministries before we start to wrap up.
Sure. So it is a beautiful, and we call it Hartridge Retreat and Cultural Center. So we want to stress both aspects of being in nature, but also art. We plan to have programs that, and we already have. We've had writers come here on a retreat so they could write. I mean, what a beautiful way to have that opportunity to write. And we foresee like artists coming here. We'd also like to have musical concerts, and we've had little ones, but we'd like to develop that program a little bit more to sort of tie in with the arts. But it's a retreat center, so it's just a place of beauty. And one thing in particular that we really stress is families spending time together. And I know this is an important thing for all families, particularly, your audience, Lisa, is that just pulling away from our busy lives and then just being able to spend time together in an atmosphere that's full of beauty. And we do summer family camps, and I think that would be of interest to some of your listeners, because we do have people from all over the world, not over the world, someday maybe, but all over the United States have come to our camp. So we're in sort of northern South Carolina. We're in the mountains here, and people come to this camp, and we do arts and crafts, of course, but more the gist of the camp is just for families to come together and experience being in this natural environment. And we play games and have fun. We do hikes to waterfalls and have mass every day, but just opportunities for conversations and prayer, just everything you would want in a family vacation in the mountains. And we lay it out. We do it all for you. We cook. This is what people love so much. We cook every meal, so the moms don't have to cook. They don't have to clean up. They can just sort of be with their families. So I'd like to put a plug for that if somebody's looking for something, and it's all inclusive. Everything's one price, like you're not paying, and you've heard me talk, I'm pretty sensitive about budgets and so on. So that, it's very reasonable, and just a really great experience. But that's something that we do over the summer. And then we'll be developing other programs too.
Wonderful. And now you mentioned you had a friend of this program, a friend of the Homeschool Connections family, is Mike Aquilina, who recently did a retreat on the early church fathers there. So you run the gamut from individuals coming to write, to families, to real, kind of events that you would advertise and be open to the public, I would assume. Lots of, well, how creative is that?
Yeah.
Okay, so take us out, Tami, having really had the joy of exploring this space around creativity and the arts. What would you like to leave us with?
I being kind of practical, Lisa, I'm so practical. I just really would ask our listeners to be intentional about how they're exposing and encouraging their children in the arts. Just, take a moment and think about, where are we spending our time? I think moms get so busy and so caught up with so many things. And I know we were talking about this earlier, and that's part of my, you mentioned my book, this ministry, The Smart Martha, and I know you do coaching, so you're always discerning, but I just want moms to sit back and discern, what are we spending our time doing? And are these where God wants us to spend our time? And I think, in relationship to the arts, like, are we spending time, developing that creativity in our children? And sometimes it means slowing down and saying no to other things. Sometimes we need to do more simple things, like just letting our kids have time to draw, have time to paint. Have time to piddle around on a piano. We need our kids to experience some of that boredom, because that's a great way for kids to be creative. And as parents, I'm telling you, I give your kids piano lessons, taking video. It seems like I'm telling you to do all these things, but sometimes I think we need just to not do things and let our kids develop some of this creativity on their own. And the best way to do that is to create space for them. In our own lives too. I mean, I'd encourage moms. Do you have time just to sit and listen to music, to read a good novel? This idea is caught, not taught. And they need to see us being creative too. When's the last time you did something creative? Do you dive in there and draw? I mean, even adult coloring pages, do something like that. So it develops that creativity in the moms, and that will pass on. Like I used to like to color with my kids, get the adult coloring book or watercolor with your kids. Don't just tell them to do it. Jump in there and do it too. And if you make a mess and yours is awful, that's okay. That's encouraging to them. It's okay. We all have our own things. So take some time, take some space, and be creative with your kids.
Such good advice. I love that. All right. You just brought back so many happy memories of coloring with my daughter at our dining room table. We just spent so many happy hours like chatting and coloring.
Yeah, isn't it?
Just being
coloring's
together.
Nice, right? Something simple. Something
Lovely.
simple.
Great rainy day activity. All right, everybody, thank you so much for being with us. Tami, thank you for your heart, for your passion for creativity and the arts and for serving others. Really appreciate you. And it's so good to see you again and have you back on the show. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you for the time. Yeah, no, thank you.
Oh my gosh.
It's been great. It's been great.
All right, everybody. Thanks again. We'll see you next time. We are praying for you. Please pray for us too. God bless you. And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.